At 7:14 local time on June 7, 2025, fire streaked across the morning sky above Kursk Oblast as a Russian Su-35 fighter spiraled downward and crashed. Within minutes, Ukrainian social media feeds buzzed with reports of a landmark kill. Headlines multiplied. Ukraine's F-16 ambushed and downed a Russian Su-35. Senior defense figures quickly pointed to the shootdown as evidence that Western-supplied fighters were beginning to make a measurable impact on the balance of the air war in the region. The German news outlet Bild went further, offering details that had aviation buffs buzzing. A Ukrainian F-16, it claimed, launched an AIM-120 AMRAAM after being vectored onto the target by a Swedish surveillance plane operating hundreds of kilometers away. But here's the snag. What if that entire picture is off? In wartime, early reports are almost always incomplete, and this incident is no exception. The real chain of events is more layered and arguably more impressive than the tidy dogfight tale now circulating. The Su-35 did fall that morning, but it wasn't downed by a US-built fighter at all. Something entirely different sealed its fate. The Ukrainian Air Force's own press note was the first telltale sign. It confirmed that the Su-35 was downed during a successful operation in the Kursk sector, yet it made no claim of an air-to-air kill and never once mentioned F-16s. Which leaves the big question: if an F-16 didn't do it, what actually sent that jet tumbling? At 06:45 that morning, a Russian Su-35S pilot completed his pre-flight walk-around at a Western Russia airbase. Once ground crews unplugged the external power carts, the twin Saturn AL-31F engines spooled up to a steady idle. Moments later, 35,000 pounds of Russia's frontline fighter hardware taxied to the runway, convinced it outmatched anything Ukraine could put in the air. The assignment was straightforward: fly a routine combat air patrol along the Kursk-Sumy frontier. Russian ground units had noted a surge in Ukrainian movements, and air cover was deemed vital. The mission objectives were simple: hold at 27,000 feet, about 16 kilometers inside Russian airspace near Koronovo, and engage any Ukrainian aircraft providing support to troops below. The Su-35S he flew sits at the top of Russia's tactical aircraft lineup. Up front, its N-035 Urbis-E passive electronically scanned array radar can track as many as 30 targets at ranges beyond 400 kilometers, about the distance from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Thrust vectoring nozzles let the jet pull off post-stall maneuvers that push aerodynamic limits, while the Kibini EW suite is built to spoof or jam incoming missiles. Together, those systems let the pilot see first, fire first, and sidestep most threats that come back his way. Let's be clear, an F-16 is perfectly capable of putting a Su-35 on the ground in pieces. Here's why that didn't happen this time. First, the obvious issue: Ukraine's F-16 roster is barely the size of a varsity squad. Kyiv accepted its first combat-ready jets in August 2024, just months before this shootdown. Of the 85 aircraft pledged by Western partners, only about 10 were flyable by June 2025. Think about that. 10 fighters tasked with guarding a nation larger than Texas. Pilot training is an even bigger hurdle. Most Ukrainian aviators have logged their careers in Soviet-era MiG-29s and Su-27s. The F-16 isn't merely different, it follows a completely opposite philosophy. Soviet doctrine favors independent sorties and within visual range dogfights, whereas the F-16 is optimized for network-centric warfare and beyond visual range shots. Experts generally note that it takes roughly 2 to 3 years for a pilot to gain full proficiency in an entirely new aircraft. Ukrainian pilots had logged barely a year on the jet. Just as troubling, 3 F-16s were already gone in under 12 months. One lost in August 2024 when Lieutenant Colonel Oleksiy Mes crashed on a mission. Another in April 2025, and a third only weeks before the Kursk incident in May 2025. That works out to roughly a 30% loss rate. Untenable unless more promised airframes arrive quickly. Russian intelligence briefings that morning reported almost no F-16 activity in the northern sector, and on that score, they were correct. Ukraine positions its prize Western jets mainly in the south and east, where they deliver the greatest defensive benefit. Their chief task is to intercept cruise missiles and drones that target key infrastructure. That assignment plays to their strengths. On defense, the aircraft can exploit their advanced radars and missiles while keeping Russian fighters and surface-to-air batteries at arm's length. Sending one of these scarce fighters 16 to 50 kilometers over the border for a penetration run would have been more than bold. It would have been poor strategy, akin to dispatching your last fire engine to deliver takeout while the town is ablaze. Russian confidence that morning rested on more than raw aircraft counts. The pilot knew Ukraine's most persistent threat stemmed from its steadily expanding ground-based air defense network, now reaching deep into Russian airspace. What he failed to foresee was how that accurate judgment would lead to his downfall. The electronic warfare suite he trusted to foil any Western missile was about to face its toughest trial yet. By 7 a.m., as the Su-35 settled into its patrol loop, unseen sensors were already quietly tracking every move. The German news outlet also claimed a Swedish Saab 340 radar plane was loitering over central Ukraine, its area array sweeping a 450-kilometer circle of sky. Sweden had indeed pledged 2 of these advanced surveillance aircraft to Kyiv in May 2024 as part of a $1.3 billion military aid package. The first of the 2 aircraft reportedly entered Ukrainian service in April 2025, just 2 months before the Kursk incident. These machines are no ordinary spotters. They function as airborne command posts, bristling with gear that would turn heads even in Silicon Valley. Each Saab 340 carries the PS-890 Irii, active electronically scanned array radar, capable of sweeping vast sectors of airspace while feeding real-time data to controllers on board. Unlike the spinning radomes on US AWACS jets, the Irii antenna sits inside a slim balance beam pod mounted atop the Saab 340's fuselage. From that perch, it can spot air and surface contacts 300 to 450 kilometers away, depending on altitude and weather. Its processors strip out ground clutter, track low-flying cruise missiles, and can even pick up something as small as a submarine periscope. Yet this is where tech reality bumps into the headline story. For a Saab 340 to steer an F-16 onto a target, both platforms must share the same digital language, the Link 16, which is NATO's tactical data link. This isn't just another radio net, it's the digital nervous system of modern warfare, letting every platform merge sensor tracks into one real-time map. Picture it as a secure, jam-resistant military WhatsApp, where each participant posts its location, what it sees, and what it's targeting. In theory, the Saab 340 could ping out updates every heartbeat. Russian fighter, grid X, bearing Y, altitude Z, giving any linked F-16 a ready-made firing cue. But that's where the F-16 scenario falls apart. Multiple accounts, including voices inside Ukraine's Air Force, say the Link 16 gear was pulled from their F-16s at Washington's request. Washington feared that a downed or captured F-16 might give Russia access to its sensitive data link hardware. It's like issuing someone a smartphone after pulling the SIM card and switching off Wi-Fi. The camera works, but you can't share the pictures. Without Link 16, coordination between the Saab 340 and Ukraine's F-16s would be limited to standard voice radio. By the time a controller voices a contact, a Mach-speed fighter has already crossed several kilometers, a lifetime in BVR combat. The schedule poses its own hurdle. The first Saab 340 arrived in April 2025, and the shoot-down followed barely 2 months later. Integrating a brand new AEW platform into a force that has never operated one is like jumping from soloist to orchestra conductor overnight. Procedures must be written, comms nets hammered out, and countless training hours logged before crews and hardware mesh. Without that groundwork, or a digital data link, the idea of a seamless handoff from a Swedish radar plane to a Ukrainian F-16 looks shaky. Even if the Irii painted the Su-35 and tried to vector a fighter in, the pilot would rely on voice calls, mental geometry, and a manual radar sweep while chasing a highly agile 4th-gen jet deep in hostile skies. That isn't a recipe for a tidy kill. It's a recipe for confusion. Remember, these obstacles aren't simply technical. They're strategic. Ukraine's F-16s are new arrivals. The pilots have only recently transitioned. Ground crews are still figuring out wartime maintenance and weapons loading, and the broader infrastructure is shifting from Soviet to Western workflows. Even mature NATO forces take years to perfect AWACS to fighter integration. Expecting Kyiv to nail that in 60 days while under continuous pressure is unrealistic, which leaves only one plausible system that could have felled the Su-35 that morning. At 7:13, a routine patrol turned into front-page news. The jet's L-150 Pastel radar warning receiver, every bit as advanced as its Western counterparts, suddenly screamed in alarm. Through the pilot's headset came the warbling tone combat flyers dread. Somewhere, a fire control radar had locked on, marking his Su-35 for a kill. Reflex took over. 35,000 pounds of thrust and thrust vector nozzles hurled the aircraft into a 7G barrel roll, spectacular enough to wow any airshow crowd. The maneuver wasn't graceful, but grace wasn't the goal. Shaking the lock before a missile could launch was all that mattered. The objective was clear: sever the radar lock before the shooter could fire. Wing-tip Kibini EW pods lit up, pouring spoofing noise across the spectrum. Chaff cartridges popped, scattering thousands of aluminum-coated glass fibers. Each sliver served as a miniature reflector, raising a billowing cloud of phantom echoes to mask the Su-35's true position, buying the pilot precious seconds from any incoming missiles. At 27,000 feet, the chaff cloud ballooned quickly, raising a metallic curtain between the Su-35 and its unseen hunter. For a moment, the tactic appeared to hold. The radar warning receiver's furious tone faded to a hesitant chirp as the hostile beam lost its grip, thrown off by the mix of jamming and chaff. The pilot allowed himself the briefest flicker of relief. Russia's prized electronic warfare defenses had, for now, done exactly what they were designed to do. Then at 7:14 and 8, just 26 seconds after the first alert, the missile approach receiver blared a sharper, more urgent tone. This was no search beam now. An inbound weapon was already in mid-course, past its booster burn, steering straight for his jet with a single lethal purpose, and closing fast. The pilot hauled the stick back and rolled inverted, pitching the Su-35's nose toward the ground in a hurried split S. If he could dive fast enough and build extra speed, he might force the missile to overshoot or lose energy trying to follow. The thrust vector nozzles swung to their limits, delivering snap attitude changes that would tear apart a conventional airframe. Flares burst from the launchers like Roman candles, each one burning hotter than the jet's own exhaust. Against an infrared seeker, they might save him, but the attacker ignored them. Its radar seeker stayed fixed on the aircraft's metal mass, not its heat. From its behavior, the weapon was clearly a track-via missile type, now making its final course adjustments. Unlike older surface-to-air missiles that rely on ground radars for mid-course guidance, this one carried its own active seeker and grew more autonomous with every kilometer. The Kibini pods, usually effective against fixed guidance beams, now struggled to blind a missile that was in effect thinking for itself. By 7:14, impact was moments away. The proximity fuse sensed the Su-35's mass and triggered. Knowing the fight was over, the pilot reached for the ejection handles. In the instant before the warhead's effects reached the cockpit, explosive bolts detonated, the canopy disintegrated, and the K-36 DMC catapulted him clear at roughly 20 G. Tumbling from 19,000 feet above Kursk's morning sky, he watched his Su-35 dissolve into a rolling mass of fire. The fighter that had seemed untouchable just minutes earlier, now scattered as smoking debris. Drifting beneath his parachute, one question crowded his thoughts. What on earth had hit him? The weapon that shredded the Su-35 wasn't Ukrainian, Swedish, or some secret prototype. Most likely, it was American, combat-proven and hiding in plain sight. The MIM-104 Patriot surface-to-air missile. Ukraine received its first Patriot battery in April 2023, and the system stands at the peak of Western air defense technology. But calling Patriot merely an air defense system is like calling a smartphone just a phone. It's a network-integrated warfare platform that upends traditional ideas of air superiority. Here's the crucial part. In its latest PAC-3 version, The Patriot employs track-via missile guidance. Older surface-to-air weapons depend on a ground radar's continuous beam. The Patriot Interceptor gradually assumes its own steering as it closes. In the terminal phase, an onboard active radar seeker activates, and once it locks, jamming is nearly impossible. The specifications tell the story. Engagement reach of roughly 160 kilometers, intercept altitudes above 72,000 feet, and terminal speeds beyond Mach 5. At short range, that leaves the target less than 2 seconds between warhead arming and impact. For a pilot, that window equals little more than 2 heartbeats. Confronted with a projectile traveling faster than a rifle round and updating its course about 50 times a second, the Su-35's thrust vector maneuvers provide scant protection. This playbook isn't hypothetical. It's already been field tested. On 14 January 2024, a Ukrainian Patriot battery brought down a Russian A-50 AWACS over the Sea of Azov. Back in May 2023, Patriot crews firing from positions near the border felled 2 Su-35s over Bryansk Oblast. Those Russian pilots likely felt as secure as the flyer on 7th June, operating inside home airspace and beneath their own defensive umbrella. Viewed in that light, the Ukrainian Air Force's conspicuously sparse statement makes perfect sense. By confirming the kill but leaving the method unspoken, Kyiv protects operational details while letting rumors do the rest. Should Russian aviators believe F-16s are prowling for them, that anxiety serves its own purpose. Reality is, if anything, more sobering. Modern air combat runs on a distributed web, sensors in one place, weapons in another, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart. So the platform that finds you isn't the one that finishes you. The media's version was off base, and that likely suits Kyiv. A headline about F-16 stalking Russian jets makes for flashier thumbnails and more clicks. But the deeper lesson is that today's warfare has moved past classic dogfights to something colder, more networked, and far harder to evade. That should be the detail keeping pilots up at night. Until next time.